Oh no, it looks like the zombie virus has made it to Fairy World, and Cosmo has been bitten and has turned into a zombie. As Cosmo's zombification transformation occurs, we will listen to a short zombie story. Barbecue and blood. You'd think an 8-year-old girl would love a barbecue festival, right? Cotton candy, the smell of ribs sizzling, and the sweet tang of sauce dripping off pulled pork sandwiches. But no, I hated it. I hated everything about it, especially this year. I'm Callie, by the way. Just Callie. Not Cal or Pumpkin like my dad calls me. Just Callie. This year, the festival was held at the church parking lot. Big white tents spread out with local vendors. The smell of meat mixed with the smell of fried pickles and boiled peanuts and made my stomach churn. Maybe it was because Mama had been cooking all night for her entry into the contest. Maybe it was because I don't trust food cooked by strangers. Or maybe, down deep, I knew something bad was going to happen. The first thing that struck me was how pale Mr. Tucker looked behind his grill. His big belly jiggled as he flipped burgers, but his face was ghost white and his apron was stained with something darker than barbecue sauce. "Everything okay, Mr. Tucker?" I asked, tugging on Daddy's sleeve. "Don't bother him," Daddy muttered, pulling me toward Mama's booth. "He's busy with his customers." But Mr. Tucker didn't look busy. He looked sick. By noon, the festival was in full swing. The air buzzed with laughter and gospel music from the church choir. Mama's pulled pork sandwich entry was drawing a big crowd, and I stood in a folding chair sucking on a lemonade and picking at my cornbread. That's when the screaming started. It came from the booth across from us. A woman clutched her throat, stumbling backward into a table. Her face turned the color of bad milk, and blood started bubbling from her lips. "Help her!" someone yelled, but before anyone could move, she lunged forward, sinking her teeth into the arm of the man next to her. I dropped my lemonade. The man's scream pierced the air as blood spurted out from his arm like water from a hose. The woman's mouth, her teeth, they didn't look human anymore. They looked jagged like the edge of a broken bottle, and they were tearing at his skin like paper. "Get in the truck," Daddy yelled, grabbing my arm. But I couldn't move. People were running everywhere, knocking over tables and screaming. Mama was yelling something too, but her voice was drowned out by the sound of the grill exploding. The fireball lit up the sky and the smell of burning pork filled my nose. "Callie, now!" Daddy yelled, pulling my arm so hard it hurt. I stumbled toward the truck, but kept looking back. I saw Mama swinging a frying pan at a man who was charging at her like a wild animal. He was bleeding from his eyes, and his skin looked like it had been boiled. "Mama!" I screamed. We didn't make it out of the parking lot. The crowd swarmed the truck, their hands slamming against the windows like we were in some kind of a cage. Daddy slammed on the gas, but the tires squealed against the asphalt. "Get back," he shouted, honking the horn. But they didn't get back. They just kept coming. The truck flipped when we hit the ditch. My head smacked against the dashboard and everything went black. When I woke up, Daddy was gone. I don't know how long I sat in the truck like that, listening to the sound outside. The growling, the screaming, the wet squishy nose of eating. When I finally crawled out, the world looked different. The tents were on fire, the white fabric stained red. Bodies lay sprawled across the parking lot, their faces twisted in pain. Some of them weren't lying still, though. They were twitching, crawling, gnawing, eating. I found Mama near her booth. Her frying pan was bent, and her hands were covered in blood. At first, I thought she was okay. "Callie," she whispered, reaching for me. Her eyes were glassy, like she was looking through me instead of at me. "Mama?" Her mouth opened, and I saw her teeth broken and bloodied. I ran. The streets of town were chaos. People were breaking into stores, smashing windows, and attacking each other. Some were even eating each other. I ducked into an alley, clutching my stuffed rabbit, Mr. Flop. He smelled like barbecue sauce. That's where I found Chef Michael. He wasn't like the others. He was bleeding, but he didn't look sick. He looked scared. "Hey, kid," he said, crouching down in front of me. "You okay?" I shook my head. "Come on, we got to get out of here." Chef Michael said he'd been working on one of the booths when it started. He told me that the meat wasn't right. Said it smelled funny. "What do you mean funny?" I asked, following him through the alley. "Like rotten, but it wasn't just that. There was something in it, in the meat." He nodded, his face pale. We ended up at the diner on Main Street. It was empty, but the door was unlocked. Chef Michael barred it with a chair, then started rummaging through the kitchen. "What are you looking for?" I asked. Answers, he muttered, opening a box of frozen patties. It didn't take long for them to find us. The growling started outside, soft at first, then louder. "They're here," Chef Michael whispered, grabbing a butcher knife. The next few hours were a blur. The infected smashed through the windows, their hands clawing at the air. Chef Michael fought them off with everything he had, knives, frying pans, even a rolling pin. I hid under the table, clutching Mr. Flop, trying not to cry. By the time it was over, Chef Michael was covered in blood. "We can't stay here," he said, pulling me out from under the table. "Where do we go?" I asked, my voice shaking. He looked at me, eyes dark. "To the source." We headed to the meat processing plant at the edge of town. The smell hit me before we got there, a mix of raw meat and something else, something foul. Chef Michael covered his nose with his sleeve, his knife still clutched in his hand. Inside, the lights flickered. The floor was slick with blood, and the machines were still running, grinding and slicing slabs of meat. But there was no one there, at least not at first. We found the source in the back of the room. A shipment of pork still in crates was oozing something black. "What is that?" I whispered, my stomach churning. Chef Michael didn't answer. He just stared at it, his face pale. That's when it moved. A black ooze bubbled and shifted like it was alive, and then it came for us. I don't remember much after that. There was screaming. There was blood. Chef Michael pushed me out the door, yelling for me to run. I ran until my legs gave out. When I looked back, the plant was on fire. That was 2 days ago. I'm sitting in the woods now, writing this in an old notebook I found in my school bag. I don't know if anyone will find this, but if you do, stay away from the barbecue. Stay away from the meat. And whatever you do, don't let it touch you. The church on Highway 64. I'll never forget the smell. It wasn't the rot of the dead, though I learned to smell that smell soon enough. No. The first sign that something was wrong at the Revival Tabernacle was the stench of sickness mixed with something sour, like bad milk that had gone rotten left out in the sun. I wasn't supposed to be there that night, but when you're 13 and bored in a town with nothing but a gas station and a dollar store, you find something to do to get into trouble. My best friend, Billy Joe, had dared me to sneak into the big tent revival they'd set up behind the church. "Come on, Zeke," kid said, grinning. "You're scared of a little Jesus freak show?" I wasn't scared, but I should have been. We slipped under the edge of the white canvas tent just as the preacher, Brother Elias, was working up the crowd. He was a tall, wiry man with sunken cheeks and eyes that burned like he could see right into your soul. His voice boomed over the cheap PA system, drowning out the chirp of crickets. "Tonight, brothers and sisters, we cast out the sickness. Tonight, we break the chains of death itself." The crowd hollered and waved their hands, swaying like the wheat in the wind. The tent's light cast weird shadows on their faces, making them look hollow, like skulls. Billy Joe nudged me. "Look at this circus," he whispered. Brother Elias raised his arms and the crowd hushed. He beckoned to an old man in a wheelchair who looked like he had been dug up out of the grave. "Brother Caleb, come forward." 2 deacons rolled Caleb up the aisle. The old man's head lolled to the side, his eyes cloudy. Brother Elias knelt before him, placing one hand on Caleb's head and raising the other to the heavens. "Lord, we command this man's body to be restored. We cast out the sickness. Let him rise." The crowd erupted in cheers as Brother Elias shouted, spittle flying from his lips. Caleb's body jerked, like he'd been shocked, and then his head snapped upright. His cloudy eyes cleared, and he started to stand. People screamed with joy, rushing to touch him like he was some kind of holy relic. But then Caleb's mouth opened in a guttural growl and sank his teeth into the arm of the nearest deacon. Blood sprayed, painting the tent red. Billy, Joe, and I froze. We'd seen horror movies, but nothing prepares you for the sound of a man screaming as his arm is ripped apart. "Holy shit, Zeke," Billy hissed. But before I could respond, the chaos spread. Caleb lunged at another person, and they went down in a tangle of limbs. More people rushed forward trying to help, but anyone Caleb bit started to convulse, and their skin started turning gray, their eyes rolling back. Moments later, they were on their feet, attacking the nearest person like rabid dogs. The tent became a slaughterhouse. Billy Joe grabbed my arm, dragging me out from under the tent as the screams turned wet, choking sounds. We bolted through the field, tripping over roots and slapping at branches until we hit the gravel parking lot. "We gotta tell somebody," I gasped, my chest burning. But who were we gonna tell? Chef Tanner? He was probably asleep in his cruiser. My mom? She'd whipped me for sneaking out. Then I thought about Pastor Amos. He was a preacher at the First Baptist Church across town. A big man with a booming laugh and a way of making you feel safe. If anyone could help, it was him. We banged on Pastor Amos's door until he opened, his face half-shaven and covered in shaving cream. "What in God's name?" he started, but stopped when he saw our faces. "What's wrong, boys?" We told him everything, talking over each other at first, and then looking like he didn't. At first, he looked like he didn't believe us, but then he saw the blood on my shirt. I hadn't even noticed it before. Must have been from when we ran through the tent. "Stay here," he said, grabbing his shotgun from behind the door. "No way," Billy Joe said. "We're coming with you." Pastor Amos hesitated, but nodded. "Fine. But stay close, boys." By the time we got back to the Revival Tabernacle, the tent was quiet. Too quiet. The flaps hung open, swaying in the night breeze. "Stay behind me, boys," Amos whispered, raising his shotgun. We stepped inside and my stomach turned. The place was littered with bodies, torn apart like rag dolls. The smell was unbearable, blood and guts, and the smell, that sour smell again, stronger now. But the worst part was the movement. The dead were still twitching, their fingers drawing in the dirt, their mouths working like they were clawing in the air. In the center of it all stood Brother Elias, his eyes glowing an unnatural yellow. "You've come to witness the miracle," he said, his voice shaking wildly. "There ain't no miracle," Amos said, leveling his shotgun. "This is an abomination." Elias laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. "You can't stop God's will, preacher. The dead shall rise and the unfaithful shall be consumed." Amos fired, the blast shattering Elias's chest. He staggered but didn't fall. Instead, he smiled, his shattered ribs knitting themselves back together. "That all you got?" Elias screamed. The dead began to rise, their broken bodies snapping back into shape. They turned toward us, their mouths rising in unholy screams. "Run," Amos shouted, shoving me toward the exit. We barely made it out alive. Amos fired shots, but the undead kept coming. By the time we reached his truck, he was out of ammo, and the creatures, they were closing in. Amos floored it, his tires spitting on gravel, and tore down Highway 64. The undead didn't chase us, but their yellow eyes glowed in the rearview mirror, watching and waiting. We spent the next few hours gathering supplies, gasoline, matches, anything we could use to burn the church to the ground. We returned to the tabernacle. The undead were still there, milling around the field like they were waiting for something. Elias stood in the center, his arms raised to the sky, chanting in some language I didn't understand. "This is it, boys," Amos said, handing me a Molotov cocktail. "Light it up." The fire spread fast, consuming the tent and the creatures inside. Their screams were like nothing I'd ever heard, high-pitched and inhuman and full of rage and pain. But the flames rose. Elias stepped out untouched, his skin charred, his eyes blazing like molten gold. "You think it ends here?" he growled. "This seed is planted, the harvest will come." Amos aimed his shotgun, but before he could fire, Elias disappeared into the night, his laughter echoing on the wind. It's been a year since that night, and I still can't sleep, not because of nightmares, though. I have plenty of those. No, it's because I know Elias is still out there spreading his plague, and one day he'll come back for us. Please, if you liked the video, if you enjoyed the transformation, consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next video.